Howdy, howdy, and welcome back to another Workshop Wednesday. This time it's all about getting started, a beginner's topic for those of you just getting underway. And we're going to talk today about understanding triggers in Google Tag Manager. Of course, before we go too far into this, my name is Chris Mercer. I do go by Mercer, and I'm the co-founder here at measurementmarketing.io, where you can find our content on such platforms as Digital Marketer, Conversion Sales, Social Media Examiner, and of course, measurementmarketing.io, where we've got tons of training and courses to help you along your own measurement marketing journeys. Our main job, of course, is to help people just like you figure out how to use all of these tools. And today, we're obviously going to talk about Tag Manager and one specific part of that. And part of what we do is we always rotate these trainings around our measurement marketing framework, really 5 key things. There's planning, which is trying to figure out what questions are important to answer, what information you need to measure, all that sort of fun stuff. Then there's the build. Well, in the build, you're using Tag Manager, using Google Analytics, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. But this particular topic that we're talking around triggers, it's the build is where that really comes in. Then you've got your information. You can build your reports and dashboards like from Data Studio or spreadsheets or even the built-in reports that are in something like Google Analytics. Once you've got your benchmarks, you can then to forecast your new results, and then you can optimize against your forecast. That's sort of the measurement marketing framework in a nutshell. Now, with all of these trainings, your main thing is just to get one new idea, right? Just go for that one thing. Don't worry about hanging on to every single thing I show you here, because this is going to be an overall training on triggers in Google Tag Manager and different aspects of using triggers in Google Tag Manager, not a deep dive into all of them. So if triggers are a brand new thing for you, maybe that's just what you get. Your one thing is just a basic understanding of what's possible, but maybe you've used triggers a little bit and you find that, oh, there's other things I can do with this or different ways to use the tools that you're about to see here. And then just take that one thing, practice it. Then you come back, rewatch this, which is why we make it publicly available, so that you can pick up something else later on down the line. All right, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Getting started, understanding triggers in Google Tag Manager. Now, we're just going to dive right in like we often do here, but we're going to start with Lucidchart, because this is a tool that I love to use for teaching. So really, we're gonna put everything into context here with Tag Manager. In your measurement in general, any measurement system at all has 3 main components. They all have at least these 3, which is collecting information. They then store that information somewhere, and then it reports that information. And this is really where you see it as a user, or where your boss or stakeholder will see it in the dashboard or reports that you provide for them. So you have to collect the information, you have to store the information, you've got to report on the information. Now, tools like Google Analytics actually do all 3 of these on their own, but Google Analytics is not super great at collecting. It's not super great at reporting, because it can be kind of confusing for a lot of people to go through those reports, but it's incredible at storage. So what do you do for the collecting and the reporting? Well, this is where these other tools come in. And look at that, fancy graphics, I know. But this is where Google Tag Manager comes in, because Tag Manager was created to collect information. It's a lot easier to use to get certain details, certain visibility on different behaviors that are happening on the site when you use Google Tag Manager, because it can see them easier than Analytics can see them on its own. So Tag Manager collects and then sends those details to Google Analytics for storage, which now stores, and then use a tool like Data Studio or spreadsheets or something else to pull the information out of Google Analytics so that the normal people can read the reports, right? Because you want to make sure that that information that you're providing is actually leading to actions, and dashboards are a great way to do that. So that's how the 3 tools work together. Now, of course, Tag Manager doesn't work just with Google Analytics. Hopefully you know that, but you can send it to other things like Facebook and other platforms along the way. So that's kind of an overview of how these tools work together. Now, I'm going to zoom out. We're going to have another conversation around tags in Tag Manager. So this is our little tag diagram here. So the way that tags work in Google Tag Manager is they're just pieces of code, little bits of script. So you can have an AdWords tag, or Google Ads, I should say, tag. You've got a Facebook tag, maybe a Hotjar, Google Analytics, of course. Maybe you're using PayPal and you've got PayPal tag. Well, you can put all of these different tags, or I should say Tag Manager puts these different tags on the pages that you want them to put on there, right? So in this case, the home page and maybe a video page you've got for an order form or some sort. And then there's the thank you page where they buy. And then you can tell it what types of tags to put on. So maybe these are just generic sort of, hey, they showed up on this page type tag. But then there's also other tags like conversion tags, which is why you see a little double stack here, because maybe you want to tell Analytics that a certain event happened because you're tracking it as a goal. Maybe you want to tell Facebook that a certain purchase happened, so you can build an audience or measure a conversion on Facebook's end. And same, of course, with Google Ads. So this is sort of the tagging process. Now that brings us to triggers. And remember, tags are really just Tag Manager saying, okay, here's what I want you to do. It's you going to Tag Manager saying, here's what I want you to do. I want you to do this thing. Now, triggers are, here's when I want you to do this thing. And this is what triggers basically do. So here you might say, okay, well, I'm going to set up tags. So Tag Manager, the tags I want you to do are to tell these different platforms that somebody's on the page and to start doing your thing, right? That's what a page view tag would do for these different platforms. And so you would tell Tag Manager when a page view happens, when the page loads, fire these tags, go activate these platforms, do these things. Then over here, you might say, well, a new page loads up. So therefore, because it's a different page, go ahead and fire these tags again. Let the platforms know about this page. And then over here, this other page view, let the platforms know about this page. But where triggers come in, and this would be a trigger. When the page loads, that's a trigger. When the pages load here, that could be a trigger. But there could also be another trigger with Tag Manager, again, because Tag Manager is really good at seeing behaviors. So what you can do is you say, hey, Tag Manager, when somebody plays my video, tell Facebook that they started playing it and tell Google Analytics they started playing it, because maybe you want to measure how they're interacting with your videos. So this would be a trigger, an example of a trigger. One trigger would be when the page loads. Another trigger would be when they play a video, right? So now you can hopefully kind of see the potential that Tag Manager has because you can get that level of visibility now. And of course, over here, you've got a conversion. So when a page view happens, do this. But when a conversion happens, I want you to send these tags to these platforms and let them know about this specific thing. So that's the idea, that there are different types of triggers, different types of behaviors that can happen on your site, and different triggers that can be based on those behaviors. And using Tag Manager is incredibly useful because it's built to see those different behaviors that are happening on the site. So let's bring up next Tag Manager so we can kind of dive into the monster itself. Now, in the beginning, Tag Manager does feel overwhelming. There is a curve to this, right? There's a little bit of a learning curve to this, but essentially it's three main things. There are tags, which we've already talked about. This is the things that you want Tag Manager to do. There are triggers, which we, of course, are about to talk about. And then there are variables, which is like, hey, here's some information you're going to need in order to do one of these other things, right? In order to do the thing I want you to do, or to when to do the thing I want you to do. That's kind of what variables are. So in Tag Manager, let's talk about triggers, because triggers are really the things of like the timing. Here's what I want. When this thing happens, when the user takes this sort of action, then do this thing, right? That's the trigger part. So what we're going to do is I want to just sort of expand out and show you all the different types of triggers, because I think a lot of times that's the issue with Tag Manager is you don't know what you don't know. And because you don't know what's possible, you don't ask Tag Manager to do certain things that it otherwise would love to do for you, just isn't being told to. So for example, you can see all of your initial triggers that are in here. So you might have a container that has some triggers already built. So we've got one set up for every time that there's a hyperlink. That's our Just Links trigger. We've got one that shows up whenever the Facebook share icon pops up. This was what they call an element visibility trigger. They've got one that's set up when the certain page view happens. And it's not just any page view, it's a specific page view that happens. So you can, deep dive into these triggers a little bit and get really, really specific. We have another one when scroll happens, when somebody's scrolling down a page, and one when they're interacting with a YouTube video. So you can see just some examples of triggers that are out there. Now, where all these are, where all of these are is under the new buttons. When you click on new, we're going to click in the box here and you'll see all the different types of triggers. Now I'm going to go through these at a very high level. Again, the goal here is not to learn how to use every single trigger because it would just be way too long of a video, but it's to get an idea of what's possible so that you go, oh, I didn't know I could even do that. Now let me go explore how to do that. So in this case, you've got these page view triggers. Now there's really three different types of page view triggers, and you can kind of think of them, they all kind of work very similarly. You can kind of think of them as different stages of when the page is being loaded. So this page view trigger is as soon as Google Tag Manager script loads. So on the page, you're going to put your GTM container script, your Google Tag Manager container script. Well, as soon as that container script, that little piece of JavaScript loads and Tag Manager is now active and it's awake and it understands what's going on now. Like it's alive, so to speak. Then that triggers a page view. That's what that is. The script is now loaded. Bam, page view is firing all the things it needs to fire. And as you already saw, you can drill these down into, I want this every single time the script loads, or I want this only sometimes if the script load, but this cookie equals that, or this URL equals that, or whatever the things are that you're trying to look for. You can dive down into deeper detail. But there are other stages of the page loading. That's what these are. There's the DOM ready and the window loaded. Now, layman's way of thinking through this. The page view, again, is when Tag Manager script first executes. Then the DOM ready is when the HTML for the page is basically built and you've got everything rendered as it's going to be. And then the window loaded is kind of, you want to think about this as the browser window itself, the browser going, yup, I'm ready to go. Like a confirmation, everything's golden. And the way that you can see that is playing out when you're in preview mode. You can see page view goes first, DOM ready is always actually always after page view, and then window loaded is after DOM ready because they always go in that order. Now, why is that? Why do you even care about having an order like that? Because sometimes the information you need isn't available till later on in the process. And so the information you need might not be available to page view for a trigger. So you fire it at DOM ready or window loaded. So there's some timing aspects that you get to do. So it's not just when a page loads, but it's which of these three different stages of the page loading do you want Tag Manager to do the thing you want it to do? So know that you can do that, right? That's why this exists, because you will use this for various implementations. You have to use this to DOM ready and window loaded on certain things. So just know that that exists. The other thing are the click triggers. Now, click's exactly what you're thinking right now. Like, okay, great, a click. So there's two types. One are these hyperlinks. That's what the just links are. And again, works the same way. You can kind of come through here and say only on certain links or whatever else you want to do. If you really want to drive down, say only on a specific button do I want you to do this. But you also have this all elements. Now, the way to think about this all elements is this is every single time the mouse button is pressed down, it fires this trigger because it is a click. It is a generic click. It doesn't have to be on a hyperlink. It doesn't have to be on any link. It can be on the middle of the page. It doesn't matter. It's a click and it's going to trigger at that point of the click. So this is one of those triggers that you can set up, but you never say all clicks because, well, I can't think of a use case anyway why you'd want to do that. But this means every single time the mouse button is pressed, the tag would fire. So you typically, I would say with rare exceptions, you would typically just go some clicks and then say only when the click ID or the click URL or the click class is this thing, and then when it contains a certain page, then you're tracking a very specific time the mouse button is pressed down, because not always are these things hyperlinked on your site. Sometimes they are, and if that works, then just click the just links trigger is perfect, right? That's the one you want to use. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's a JavaScript or a pop-up or something like that, and you need to track it with the all elements, but you tie it down. You say, well, only certain parts of this all elements trigger. So know that there are two different ways to track clicks as a trigger in Google Tag Manager. Next up are these engagement triggers. So there's different styles of engagement. I'm gonna come back to, actually, you know what? We'll start with this one since it's at the top. Element visibility. It's one of my favorite ones. What element visibility means is if we go down here, and I'm gonna click onto this little post. So what this means is when a certain element pops up, then and only then do I want you to actually go through and fire the tag. So I could set up a trigger where when this shows up in the browser window. So in fact, this one's probably a bad example. Let me go do this. I'm going to go to a long post where this is scroll down. So let's say we have a scroll and you only want to see when a certain part of the page comes into view. And by view, I mean the browser window itself. So as we're going through and scrolling, if you just want to see when this thing happens, so meaning when the user could potentially see it, this is an element and it is now visible, hence the element visibility tag. So you can actually tell Tag Manager when this specific element comes into the browser view, fire a tag. And you can tell it, fire it every single time this happens. So it would fire again, and it would fire again just now. It would fire again just now. Or you can say, hey, you know what? Just fire it once when this page loads. So it would fire just that one time and then not fire again. So there's different restrictions that you can put on this tag, but that's what element visibility is. And so when you come into element visibility, Tag Manager is going to say, great, what element do I want? You could do it by ID or CSS selector. And then you tell it, okay, how often? Once every time it shows up, once per element, once per page, how much of that element should be available in the browser in case if it's a really large like infographic style image that you want to measure. You could say, well, when they load at least half that image or they've scrolled through at least half of it, then do this thing. You've got on-screen duration. You can even do DOM changes, a little more advanced, but this is for tracking those hard-to-track forms, like on WordPress, Contact Form 7, where you don't go to a thank you page necessarily after submitting a lead, but you click on a button, it sort of does a little green check mark and says, success, it's been submitted, but the URL doesn't change. Well, those are hard to measure, and that's why you use things like element visibility, because those triggers are exactly what you need to measure those. So that's element visibility. Now, another, the user engagement, obviously form submission. So if you have the option, you can do that and just say, I want to set up when a form is submitted. And that's Tag Manager listening for a certain type of form submission. And if that happens, then great, you can submit your form. So you have that one. Then you've got scroll depth, which is you going to Tag Manager and Tag Manager saying, okay, I'm going to listen for scroll depth and I want it vertical or horizontal. And then you can define the different stages, what percentage or the number of pixels that you want something to fire. And again, that would fire a tag presumably to something like Google Analytics where you're tracking events, even Facebook, if you wanted to track how far down somebody is scrolling on your pages. So that's scroll depth that exists as a trigger. And YouTube videos. So if you have an embedded YouTube video, you can tell Tag Manager, listen, when they start it, when they complete it, when they make it through certain percentages or a certain amount of time by seconds, you can define time. So there's lots of cool things that you can do with Tag Manager from a triggering perspective that says when they start, complete, or progress, let's say to the 30-second point, then fire this tag. And that's how this trigger would be set up, right? Not that hard to set up. You can see what's back here. It's really amazing what they've made possible with Tag Manager. Then you've got some more specific things that are a little more customized, but so I'll run through those a little bit. Obviously, there's one called Custom Event. So in Tag Manager, you can push things in what they call the data layer. Again, it's a little more advanced. If that doesn't mean anything to you right now, it's not important that you know this to get started, but know that eventually you can get really, really customized. An example of a custom event in our setup here, you can see this right here. It would be a custom event, something that was completely made up, in this case by a plugin that we are using that's sent through this custom event. Well, I can use this as a trigger. When this thing happens, then fire whatever the tag is, right? Sometimes you use those for like reporting e-commerce coming through here. You also have history changes. As if when the browser window is changed, you can use that. Again, a little more technical. You might be working with your developer on some of this stuff. Same on JavaScript error. You might be working with your developer on some of that, or maybe they would want to know that these are possible so that they could set that up. But things like timer, super simple. You can come and say, okay, well, I want to call this name, my timer. You can name it whatever you want. If I can click in there we go. So we'll say my timer. And then you can say interval in milliseconds. So if I do 10,000, it means 10 seconds. So then I can say fire 10 times every 10 seconds or fire one time for after 10 seconds, and that's it. And then you can enable the timer on certain pages and maybe use that timer to trigger some sort of awareness or engagement event that's happening, some other tag you want to be fired based on a timer. So you've got that potential as well. You also have, let me go back in here, you also have trigger groups. Now these are fairly new, been around for a few months now, but these are when these triggers have actually happened. So you go, okay, well, I want to see this trigger happen, and then this trigger happen. And when these three things happen, so when this trigger happens and this trigger has happened, and the second this trigger has happened, then fire the tag. So it's actually a trigger that's made up of a certain number of triggers. So when all three of these have completed, then the thing fires. Again, you can still drive down into certain conditions if you wanted to. So that's trigger groups. So now you've got the trigger of triggers, if you want. Literally, it's a trigger that's made up of other triggers. So incredible things that are available with Google Tag Manager and triggers. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you before we end this particular workshop is to figure out, how do you use triggers and how do you know if they're working or not? Because really, Tag Manager, there is confusion when something doesn't work the way you think it's supposed to, and you're pretty convinced you set it up properly, and you don't know where to start to fix it, right? So maybe you're trying to fire a Facebook pixel or a Google Analytics tag of some sort, and it's just not working the way you think it's supposed to be. So you use preview mode, and again, you turn that on by going to preview. You'll see an orange bar up here that shows you that you are currently in preview space. And then you'll, of course, this is the dead giveaway, you'll see on your page this little window. So in the preview mode, as it relates to triggers, what you can do is you can come into the point of time. So here it says page view. So you always default into summary when this loads up. And let's pretend for a second this page view one, we wanted to dive into how this was firing one time. Maybe we were like, hey, this isn't supposed to fire. I wonder why it's firing. What you can do is you can double click into it. When you do that, you come down, when you click into it, you come down here, it says messages where this tag fired, page view. This tells you when. This tells you the trigger that was, or the event, I should say, that was happening. So in this case, you scroll down and you look for the page view. It's going to be number 2. So you come down to number 2 page view, and we're going to do the same thing. So now we're looking at just number 2 page view. We're going to go back into that tag, and it says, oh, succeeded. Okay, it fired. Great. So I'm going to click into it. I'm going to come down, and then you notice that number 2 page view thing is gone because we're actually looking at number 2 page view. But what we also see now is a little more description around firing triggers with a green check mark. So green check mark means this thing happened. That's why I fired it. If it has an X over it, it means this thing did not happen. That's why I did not fire the tag. So that's how you can sort of deep dive into this. And I'm going to go into another one. Let's use this engagement scroll as an example. So this one, these are tags that did not fire on this particular event, which is the page view event. So I'm going to click into the scroll. We're going to come down. It's going to say, well, it did match this. It was enabled. It was listening for a scroll, but the event of scroll depth did not happen. All right, the event of scroll depth did not happen, which is this right here. If I click on number 6, and I see where that little scroll now, it says tags fired. Well, if I click here, it says, yes, the reason I fired is because I was listening for a scroll and the scroll happened. And that's why I fired. Then I fired this tag, which the different, in this case, an event tag that came through, and it passed through what the event information was. In this case, scroll of 10%. So that's sort of how you can use triggers to figure out, okay, where in my logic, because sometimes that's where it is, where in my logic are things off. Again, I might come into this and say, well, at this scroll, I also thought this, Facebook lead was supposed to fire. Why didn't that fire? Well, I come in here, it would say, well, I was listening for, and you will get used to this. It doesn't say page view here, but this GTM.js means page view. So it says, I was waiting for a page view, and I was waiting for a specific page view. So it had to be a page view on this page. And that's the only time that this lead would have happened, right? So if I go to page view and I see the Facebook lead here, and I'm going to click on this, and it says, well, okay, I was on a page view, but it wasn't this page view. And that's why I didn't fire. So you see this combination of little green check mark means, yep, this was good, but this X is what kept it from firing. So here's where you see your logic and you go, oh, actually, no, sorry, this is the wrong page view. I should change this page URL because that should not have blocked it from firing. So it gives you this preview mode of Tag Manager, gives you the ability to see how your triggers are working and how they are not working to keep things from firing and not firing from a tagging perspective. So with that, we will go ahead and bring this one to a close. Hopefully you got at least one new thing, maybe just a different way to think about triggers if you're just getting started with Tag Manager and helping to put them into context and how things fit together. Maybe it was the idea of something like the element visibility trigger being a thing, or trigger groups. You didn't realize those were now in existence. Maybe it's using preview mode and deep diving into how you can debug your triggers and using preview mode to really see the story, at least Tag Manager's version of the truth as far as why it did what it did, because that will help you debug and fix your own implementations on your end. Now, if you do want to learn more about this, definitely measure.tips/courses would be a great place to go. It will bring you to the list of courses that we have over at measurementmarketing.io. We've got very focused courses, typically 4 to 7 lessons, everything from Tag Manager and analytics and knowing your numbers and traffic attribution and on and on and on. So you can see all of those there. We also have the Academy, a short link there to get there is measure.tips/academy, and that will take you to the information page about the Measurement Marketing Academy. More for teams. It includes all of the WIN courses, has multiple logins. There's group coaching elements as well where you can talk with instructors. So definitely check that out if that is more to your liking. And of course, if you are an Academy member, every Wednesday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, we do have the Measurement Marketing Academy office hours member Q&A. You already have your links in the members area and of course in your email. So check those, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Office Hours member Q&A. Now, next week's topic is Beyond the Basics. So every week we rotate topics. This week was a getting started, kind of a beginner's topic. Next week, a little bit more detailed, where we deep dive. And we're going to use cookies. We're going to start learning how to set cookies using Google Tag Manager. Now, not all of these workshops are publicly available, but they are available to you free of charge. You just have to get them through the list. So measure.tips/WW. You have to be a part of Workshop Wednesday in order to see them. So it's free to join, at least currently. So again, measure.tips/WW will take you to that page. And each week we'll just mail you out and say, hey, here's the topic for this week. You're more than welcome to watch the video for that week. And then it gets replaced out by the next video for the next week. So that's how that works. So look forward to seeing you there if you are not yet already there. And with that, we will go ahead and bring it to a close. You've just watched Getting Started, Understanding Triggers in Google Tag Manager. Thanks again for watching this workshop, and we will see you on the next. Take care.